Iron Maiden, one of the pioneers of the new wave of British heavy metal, were not the first heavy metal band to incorporate themes of horror into their music. Black Sabbath have been writing music with occult themes since their very first self-titled album was released back in 1970, thus proving that horror and heavy metal were intertwined right from the beginning. But Iron Maiden, or more specifically, its founding member, Steve Harris, added both a layer of literary sophistication and psychological terror to the subject of horror in the band's music. I mean, they were named after a medieval torture device after all, and that theme of drawing from literary sources in their music dated back to the band's origins. It's these early years, and their first two albums in the pre-Dickinson era, that will be the focus of this episode. Iron Maiden were never exactly a theatrical band in the way that, say, Alice Cooper was, but their stage props and visuals, as well as their edgy branding with all its horror elements, were very much a part of their identity, right from the get-go. The band's logo, for example, has a curious history. The story goes that in 1977, at Crow's studio in London, Dennis Wilcock, then lead singer of Iron Maiden, was also the studio's manager. Dennis selected the most metal-style font he could find from stacks of typeface catalogs and ordered a PMT, or photomechanical transfer, from a typositor. Then, the hip young designer, Ray Hollingsworth, modified it and developed it into the Iron Maiden logo that we know and love today. The name of that typeface has been lost to time, but some findings show that it might have been a font named Busk. Some of the earliest known sightings of this font are in the sleeve for the reissue of Green-Eyed God by Steel Mill in 1975, Visionary by Gordon Giltrap in 1976, the poster for the David Bowie film The Man Who Fell to Earth also in 1976, Nana Muscuri's Live at the Royal Albert Hall in 1978, and Mama's Boy's self-titled album from 1981. It's possible that the typeface was designed by Helmut Wenska, aka Chris Hyde, who drew similar lettering on the album cover Rock and Roll Testament by Cathego in 1974. Or perhaps it was the illustrator, Peter Bungard, who drew similar lettering on the sleeve of Sea Sun by Secret Oyster, also in 1974. Either way, it should be noted that a little controversy exists around the origins of the Iron Maiden logo, because very early on, Steve Harris took credit for the design. However, prior to 1977, the band was using an entirely different font and imagery, so it could be that this was the design that Steve Harris was taking credit for. Another iconic Iron Maiden visual that was part of their stage act was a mask that hung behind the drummer, Doug Sampson at the time, which gushed fake blood out of the mouth opening, and usually covering poor Doug in the process. The original mask prop was made of paper mache, which was later upgraded to a fiberglass version with glowing red lights for eyes and red smoke billowing from its mouth. This prop was dubbed Ed the Head. After Iron Maiden signed their first recording contract with EMI, it was the band's manager, Rod Smallwood, that decided that the band needed, quote, that one figure who utterly stamped his presence and image on the band in a way that was obvious enough to make a good album cover, end quote. So, he met with local artist Derek Riggs, who had sketched a portrait of a ghoulish character as an idea for a punk rock album. According to Riggs, in the documentary 12 Wasted Years, he referenced a photo from the Vietnam War of a soldier's severed head on a Vietnamese tank, which he speculates might have been a stage piece of American propaganda. The illustration was then finessed and used for the band's first album cover. And thus, Iron Maiden's iconic mascot, Eddie, the figure that became the most recognizable mascot ever, was born. With heavy metal music, it's important to understand the ways in which it is a product of its environment. Iron Maiden was born out of the gritty landscape of East London, specifically West Ham, which was, not unsurprisingly, a working-class neighborhood in decline during the 70s and 80s. This was due to the shutdown of industrial business and cutbacks in the region, and the subsequent job losses that followed. But London's seedy East End already had a long history of poverty, prostitution, and crime. The 19th century saw such notable murders as that of the London Burkers, as well as the heinous crimes of Jack the Ripper. And murder does seem to be a common theme in quite a few songs from Iron Maiden's first two albums. The horror-themed tracks from their 1980 self-titled debut album are as follows. Prowler, credited to Steve Harris and dating back to Iron Maiden's 1977 demo tape, hints at the nefarious thoughts of a sexual predator. Sanctuary, credited to Dave Murray and Paul Di'Anno, as well as Harris, tells the darkly salacious tale of a fugitive on the run from the law for what seems to be the murder of a woman. The original artwork for the single for Sanctuary featured a crouched Eddie atop the slain body of British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. As bold as this cover was, it was not actually a deeply political image. You see, Rod Smallwood purposely wanted to generate controversy over the cover to draw attention to the single and to the band, and his strategy was immensely successful. Thatcher earned the nickname the Iron Maiden from her tough stance with the USSR. Smallwood took this as an opportunity to create a little tongue-in-cheek competition between her and the band's mascot Eddie. Thatcher returns in the artwork for the band's following single, a cover of Skyhook's Women in Uniform. She is dressed in military fatigues and carrying a machine gun, waiting around the corner to exact her revenge on an unsuspecting Eddie. Moving along, track 4, Phantom of the Opera, is the first song that directly pays homage to its horror source material. This song was written entirely by Steve Harris, and it remains an extremely progressive musical arrangement, even to this day, with its many intricate transitions and time changes. Although track 6 is an instrumental, again written by Harris, the title, Transylvania, is all the horror theme proof we'll need, so let's move on to track 7. This song, titled Strange World, also dates back to the band's former lineup. In fact, Paul Day, Iron Maiden's first lead vocalist from 1975 to 1976, has claimed his involvement in the writing of Strange World. The song Strange World is a haunting fantasy ballad with a dreamlike quality, although the lyrics, girls drinking plasma wine, and living here you'll never grow old, hint at a possible vampire twist. Now, keep in mind that the track that led into Strange World was called Transylvania. The final track is a self-titled Harris composition, Iron Maiden, the band's anthem that doesn't disappoint on the blood and violence scale. It plays like a warning for unsuspecting fans. Iron Maiden wants you for dead. Iron Maiden followed up their debut album with their second outing, Killers, in 1981. They began working with producer Martin Birch, and the quality of the album's production soared to new heights. 3 tracks off their second album directly reference murder scenarios, or femicide to be more specific. These are Murders in the Rue Morgue, Killers, and Innocent Exile. The first of these is a retelling of the short story of the same name by Edgar Allan Poe. Paul Di'Anno has a writing credit on the track Killers. The American release of the album Killers has an additional track on side 2 called Twilight Zone, which is essentially a ghost story, and it was co-written by Dave Murray. The album further solidifies Iron Maiden's signature dark prog metal sound, and Di'Anno's vocal style maintains an attitude of punk rock, even if that wasn't his intention. It seems fairly evident that Di'Anno's influence contributed not only to Iron Maiden's signature sound and style, but also to their lyrical themes, especially to certain grittier, horror-infused classics such as Killers. According to various sources, the first time that Di'Anno saw Iron Maiden play, he thought they were a joke. It was their show at the Cart and Horses pub in East London, and the singer at the time, Dennis Wilcock, pranced around the stage wielding a sword, fake blood dripping from his mouth. But when the band auditioned the slightly skeptical Di'Anno, the musical style and performative chemistry he had with the band was undeniable. And it was just 2 years later that they secured their first recording contract with record label EMI. However, that incredibly successful partnership only lasted for Iron Maiden's first 2 albums. By the time Killers was released, the strain of constant touring was more than Di'Anno could bear, and it culminated in his excessive substance abuse and increasingly violent outbursts. It was a mutual decision by both he and Harris that they should part ways. When Di'Anno's autobiography, The Beast, came out in 2002, his own words gratuitously described a lifestyle that could have been lifted directly from the lyrics of Sanctuary, Running Free, Charlotte the Harlot, or Innocent Exile, with his most heinous crimes falling under the category of domestic abuse. Paul Di'Anno's lifestyle was a stark example of life imitating art, and it had a detrimental effect on his health going forward, despite his effort to move beyond the trappings of being the first official frontman of the world's most successful heavy metal band. And so, the first chapter of this incredible band's meteoric rise to megastardom had come to an end. But it ushered in the next chapter of groundbreaking music, starting with probably the most notorious horror metal hit ever written. But that's a story for another episode.